Now, as I've stated in the previous video, definitions are everything. And so you have to understand what a particular term means or how it's being used. Sometimes there's not an explicit definition for a term, and you've got to kind of look at where all it's being used, where is it being discussed, and try to build you a picture as to what it is they're talking about when they use that particular term. U.S. person is such an example. They do have definitions, but as you see when we go through this, it really means one particular thing. So a U.S. person, and this is the synopsis, a U.S. person is someone that receives money for a non-resident alien, and in this particular mock-up, we're going to go through that. So the first thing to note is that Treasury Decision 8734 was released in 1999, and the whole Treasury decision is all on U.S. or non-resident aliens, the entire thing. There's nothing else that's being discussed in that particular Treasury decision. And one of the things that you'll note from that Treasury decision, and I do have a copy of it, but I'll just show it to you. So this is the Treasury decision, and it goes through, and you can see right here, this is the title of it. It says General Revision of Regulations Relating to Withholding of Tax on Certain U.S. Source Income Paid to Foreign Persons and Related Collection Refunds and Credits. So the entire thing is talking about a non-resident alien. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And another thing that it talks about in that particular thing is the fact that you're to use a 1099 and a W-9 to report income that you're receiving on behalf of a non-resident alien. So just to kind of explain this, if you have an employee that, bad use of a word, but if you have an employee that is a non-resident alien, he's just here temporarily working, and I think there's even a period of time he has to be here before he even gets that classification, but he's here temporarily working. He's not a resident. He's not a U.S. citizen, and you're paying him. Well, you have to take, it's mandatory that you have to take money out of his paycheck before you pay him 30%. You have to take it out of his paycheck, and you have to provide it to the federal government. When you do that, he doesn't have to fill out any tax forms. He can fill out a 1040 if he wants to get some of the money back because maybe I took out too much and he's under a tax treaty or whatever, and he wants to get some of it back. He can fill out a 1040 to do that, but he doesn't have any requirements to report anything because as his employer, or maybe I'm not even his employer, I just hired him, I am the one that's taking out the tax. But let's say that I don't want to mess with the taxes. I don't want to have to deal with all that. And so I hire you to represent him. Well, you are what's called a pass-through or a beneficial owner. And you are the one that I'm paying. So what happens is you provide me with a W-9 admitting that you are a pass-through between the money that I'm about to pay and the person, the non-resident alien that's receiving it. And so in that particular case, you would fill out a W-9 and give it to me, and then a 1099, I would fill out a 1099 to give to you and to the IRS. Now, the reason behind that is that if I paid money that I believe and you have told me is going to a non-resident alien by filling out that W-9, I've got to make sure that the IRS at least knows that you were supposed to pay that bill. And so that's what the 1099 and the W-9, the 1099 and W-9 hook together. It is not legal for me to give you a 1099 unless you have provided me with a W-9 stating that you are in management of money that is going to a non-resident alien. And we'll get into other words as we go through this, but right now I'm trying to stick to U.S. person. And so The next thing I want to look at here is inside of the 1099 form and the W-9. So we're going to take a look at the W-9. It says payers subject to these reporting and withholding rules include both U.S. persons and foreign persons subject to certain exceptions. Under Chapter 61 of the Code, and that's the payroll taxes, many types of payments such as interest, dividend, royalties, broker proceeds, etc., reportable payments must be reported on a Form 1099 if paid to certain U.S. persons. So and this actually is not part of that code. It should be out here. Okay, I'm not sure why that's doing that. It should be broke out, but I'll take care of that later. So now, the term U.S. person first appeared in the regulations in 1962 and was clearly being referenced as someone handling money for non-resident aliens. Now, since then, they've changed the code where it's more misleading and you can't really get a handle on it. Essentially, a withholding agent, a payor, an employer, and a U.S. person all have something to do with him managing money for a non-resident alien. And you're going to get that as we get through all this. So as an example of something that is, in my opinion, nefarious, that pretty much proves that this whole thing is a ruse, when you open up an account with the bank, they have you sign a signature card. Well, if you go get a copy of your signature card, and I'm going to show you my signature card here in just a second. When you go get a copy of your signature card, on the W-9 form, if you look at down at the signature part, there's a clause in there that says that any form supplied by anyone that uses a similar language is a W-9 form. So it doesn't have to say W-9 across the top. In this case, it's a signature card for your bank. But it has you declaring yourself as a U.S. person and a beneficial owner. And we'll get into beneficial owner in a different video, but right now I'm trying to stick with the U.S. person. But that's what the W-9 is, and that's what it's for. And they made you sign that when you opened up your bank account and never told you any of that. They never told you that by signing that section down there, and it's also misleading because it says you're verifying that the TIN number, the Social Security number on the form is correct, and you're verifying that you're not subject to backup withholding, which we'll get to in another video, and you're a U.S. person. That's all it says. It's you really would not ever think that is a W-9, but it is. That's the whole purpose in that section. And you'll notice where you actually sign for your signature cards in a completely different part of that particular form. All right, so let's take a look. Here is the W-9 form, and it says, under penalties of perjury, I certify that. And then, but what I want to look at right here is certification instructions. And it gives you some information, and it says, let's see. Well, it says the number shown on the form is correct. Your taxpayer identification number, your TIN. It says you're not subject to backup withholding. I am a U.S. citizen or other U.S. person. So that is an interesting use of words, and you'll see what that means here in a minute. And then the certification instructions, you're basically under perjury. You're declaring all this, and it says sign here. It says signature of U.S. person. Now, on later signature cards, they've modified this, and they put a line here that says by signing the signature card, you're agreeing to this under perjury. So it's a little bit different, but it's the same W-9 information. All right, so then right here is on the W-9 form, and you can download a copy of this and look at it. It says by signing this form, it gives you those things again. And you'll notice number 5 is a tax treaty for a non-resident alien. So this is an interesting thing to put on there if all you're doing is just saying that you're receiving income. And you'll also notice right here, it says certify to your non-foreign status for purposes of withholding under chapters 3 and 4. So you'll notice 3 and 4 are all about non-resident aliens. And so what you're doing is you're saying, I'm not a non-resident alien, but I'm receiving money on his behalf. And that's essentially what the W-9 is doing. And then another note on there, it says, if you are a U.S. person and a requester gives you a form other than the W-9 to request your TIN, you must use the requester's form if it is substantially similar to this form. So this is the clause that basically says that your bank signature card, because they're asking you for your TIN, that means that you're signing a W-9 form. And then if you look, this is a copy of my W-9. It says I have, and I don't remember even checking this. I think the bank filled that out. I don't know how this got filled out. And then I signed it, because these are actually computer generated X's that are in here, but my signature is down here. So I don't know how they did that. All right, so then further down it says establishing U.S. status for purposes of Chapter 3 and 4. Again, Chapters 3 and 4 are non-resident alien income stuff. It has nothing to do with a U.S. citizen. So, and it's also talking about you're establishing your U.S. status. Payments made to foreign persons, including certain distributions, allocations of income, or transfers of sales proceeds, may be subject to withholding under Chapter 3 or 4 of the Code, and that's Section 1441 through 1474. And you'll see those are actually not. In fact, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll jump up here, and I'll go right here, and we'll go to income taxes, Chapter 3. Non-resident alien, and you'll see 1441 through 1446. Those are all non-resident alien codes. So get back over here. So this whole form is you saying that you are receiving funds for a non-resident alien. And so it says payments made to foreign persons, including certain under those rules, if Form W-9 or other certification of a non-foreign status has not been received, a withholding agent, transferee, or partnership payor generally applies presumption rules that may require the payor to withhold applicable tax from the recipient, owner, transferee, or partner. So in other words, they can presume that you are this thing even if you haven't given them a W-9 form. So if you don't explicitly say you are not receiving money on behalf of a non-resident alien, and that's what I ended up doing with my bank, is taking them a affidavit stating that I don't receive any money from non-resident aliens and that I withdraw my signature off of that W-9 signature card. All right, so notice how it's referring to Chapter 3 and 4. So now we have 26 CFR, this U.S. person. Now, this actually has the definition for a U.S. person. It tells you to use the definition found in 7701A30. Now, remember from the definition section, I said there's a global section of definitions inside of Title 26. That's the 7701. So this is referring you to the 30th definition that is supplied in 7701A. And it gives you the definition for a United States person. And if we jump over here and look at it, it says a United States person means a citizen or resident of the United States, a domestic partnership, domestic corporation, or any estate. Now, keep in mind what is being said here. You are declaring that you are a pass-through. Well, in order to be that, you would have to be a United States citizen. So this is not saying that every United States citizen has to pay this tax. It's saying that in order to be this pass-through, you would be a resident or a U.S. citizen. So that's all it's saying. So if you look down here, this is 1471 U.S. person. It tells you use the definition found here. I guess I skipped over. So here is 1441, requirement for the deduction and withholding of tax payments to a foreign person. So this is your 1441 code. This is a CFR, so it's an explanation of what 1441 actually says. And it says It prescribes the procedures to determine whether an amount must be withheld under Chapter 3 of the Code and documentation that a withholding agent, and there is a definition for a withholding agent that we will get into, a withholding agent may rely upon to determine the status of a payee, which is the person being paid, or a beneficial owner, which is that in between, as a U.S. person or as a foreign person, and other relevant characteristics of the payee. So they're essentially saying that there's a procedure for figuring out whether you might be the payee, the person being paid, might be a beneficial owner or a U.S. person or a foreign person. If they're a foreign person, then that would maybe be a resident alien. All right, because they would be having to pay this too. But it's a withholding under Chapter 3 of the Code. So Chapter 3, again, non-resident aliens. So it appears at this point that a U.S. person is a United States citizen and that they can be a payee or a beneficial owner and are called a U.S. person. A foreign person is something else entirely. All right, so general rules of withholding. This is inside of the 1441. This is the next CFR. It says a withholding agent must withhold 30% of any payment of an amount subject to withholding. So keep in mind that all through this, it always says subject to withholding. It doesn't say all income is supposed to be taxed. It's only income that is subject to withholding. And so it made to a payee, the person that's getting paid, that is a foreign person, unless it can reliably associate the payment with documentation upon which it can rely to treat the payment as made to a payee that is a U.S. person or as made to a beneficial owner that is a foreign person entitled to a reduced rate of withholding. So they're kind of lumping all these terms together, and as we go through this, you're going to kind of start to see a picture. But the point is that a withholding agent is the person that is in control of that money at the very beginning. They're the ones that have to determine whether they're going to withhold the tax or if they're going to push it off through a W-9, 1099 situation. But at some point, they're the ones that are responsible for making sure that tax is taken care of. So now it would appear a payee could be a foreign person, making one wonder what is being discussed. All right, so let's go on. Claim of status. So this is another 1441 CFR, and it says further confirms the term U.S. person as a special type of person receiving income on behalf of a non-resident alien. So it states, absent actual knowledge, so they don't have any idea who the heck you are, absent any actual knowledge or reason to know otherwise, a withholding agent may rely upon the provisions of this paragraph D in order to determine whether to treat a payee, the person receiving it, or the beneficial owner, that's what you are at your bank, as a U.S. person. So again, they're not, a U.S. person is something specific. We believe that a U.S. person is a U.S. citizen, but that is not at all what a U.S. person is. A U.S. person is someone that's in control of money that is eventually going to a non-resident alien, and a beneficial owner is what you're saying you are when you sign that signature card at your bank. And what that means is that you have possession of a non-resident alien's money, but you can use it. You're a beneficial owner of that money, but it's for a non-resident alien, and that's why the banks report all your money going through your account. They're trying to keep track of that money that's eventually going to some non-resident alien that you don't even know about, and all because you signed that W-9 form. All right, so then it goes on to say that providing a form W-9, so this is the proof that the W-9 is for this purpose, or valid substitute form, your bank signature card, shall serve as a statement that the person whose name is on the form is a U.S. person. So again, you put your name on there, you signed it, and now they're going to treat you as a U.S. person. Here's a presumption of status, again, in the CFRs for that same section, 1441. The determination of withholding and reporting requirements applicable to payments to a person presumed to be a foreign person is governed only by the provisions of chapters 3 and 4 of the code and the regulations thereunder. In other words, all of this status stuff is all related to the non-resident alien things. So it has nothing to do with us. It is all because we filled out, and you're going to find out the W-4 is the same way, but it's because we filled out a W-9 or a W-4, and that form is having us declare that we are a U.S. person. In other words, we are managing money for some fictitious non-resident alien, and that's what's giving them control over us. And then it goes on to say, for the determination of withholding and reporting requirements applicable to payments to a person presumed to be a U.S. person, see Chapter 61 of the Code, Section 3402, 3405, and 3406. Now, this is interesting because we are talking about non-resident aliens, and they just provided us a hook back into the payroll section. So you can kind of start to wonder if payroll taxes actually have anything to do with us, and we'll get to that. But that is the overall look at what a U.S. person is. It is a U.S. citizen, or it can be a U.S. citizen or a resident alien, or even a foreign person in some of this. But what it is not a U.S. person that has nothing to do with a non-resident alien.